Locked doors cannot keep evil within forever. I used to think college would be the best years of my life. That's what everyone says, right? Freedom, friendship, finding yourself. Instead, I found something else in the sealed wing of Lancaster Hall. Something that's still with me, even now, 3 years later, as I write this from my parents' basement in Maine, trying to piece together what remains of my sanity. My name is Emma Collins, and this is a warning about what happens when curiosity leads you to places that should stay locked. I got into Cornell University with a full scholarship in the fall of 2021. Coming from a small town in Maine, the sprawling campus felt like stepping into another world. The Gothic architecture, the endless corridors, the sense of history pressing in from every angle. I loved it immediately, especially Lancaster Hall, the freshman dorm where I was assigned to live. Lancaster was one of the oldest buildings on campus, built in 1898. It had that perfect haunted house look, all red brick and ivy, with towers and turrets that seemed to scrape the sky. The inside was a maze of wooden staircases and long hallways lit by modern fluorescent lights that somehow made the shadows deeper instead of chasing them away. My roommate, Taylor Chen, was everything I wasn't. Confident, outgoing, from a wealthy family in San Francisco. But we clicked immediately over our shared love of true crime podcasts and paranormal investigation shows. We'd stay up late watching ghost hunting videos and trading theories about famous hauntings. It was fun, harmless. Until we learned about the East Wing. The East Wing of Lancaster Hall had been sealed off since 1987. Officially, it was due to structural concerns, but of course, there were rumors. A student suicide in '86, a failed experiment in the old physics lab, a tragic accident during renovation. Everyone had a different story, but they all ended the same way, with the wing being permanently closed off, blocked by a heavy fire door with multiple locks. Taylor became obsessed with the East Wing. She'd spend hours researching its history in the library archives, trying to piece together what really happened. She found newspaper clippings about strange occurrences, students reporting odd noises, unexplained cold spots, electronics malfunctioning, but nothing concrete about why it was closed. "We have to check it out," she'd say almost every night. "Think about it. No one's been in there for over 30 years. Who knows what we might find?" I always said no. I loved ghost stories, but actually breaking into a sealed-off wing? That seemed like crossing a line. Plus, there was something about that fire door that made my skin crawl. Sometimes, walking past it late at night, I could swear I heard something on the other side. Not noises exactly, but a sort of pressure, like the air itself was trying to speak. Then came fall break. Most students went home, but I couldn't afford the plane ticket back to Maine. Taylor's flight to San Francisco was canceled due to weather, so we were among the few students left in Lancaster. That's when everything changed. "I found a way in," Taylor announced one night, bouncing into our room with an excitement I'd never seen before. "The maintenance guy, Jerry? He let slip that there's an old service elevator that still connects to the East Wing. It's behind a false wall in the basement laundry room." I tried to talk her out of it. "Taylor, if that wing is sealed off, there's probably a good reason. Come on, Em, when are we going to get another chance like this? The building's practically empty. No one will know." I should have said no. Should have told someone what she was planning. Instead, I agreed to go with her. Because that's what friends do, right? Keep each other safe. We waited until after midnight. The laundry room was deserted, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube that made everything look sickly and unreal. Taylor had somehow gotten the maintenance keys. She never told me how. And sure enough, behind a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest, we found the old elevator. It was ancient, with a manual gate you had to pull across. The metal creaked as we stepped inside, and the whole thing smelled like rust and decay. Taylor pulled the gate shut, and we both held our breath as she pressed the button marked 3E, 3rd floor, East Wing. The elevator groaned to life, shuddering as it carried us up. Neither of us spoke. I remember thinking we could still turn back, still pretend this had never happened. Then the elevator stopped and Taylor pulled open the gate. The East Wing was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The air was thick and stale, but not in the way you'd expect from a place that had been sealed for decades. It felt alive somehow, like breathing in someone else's breath. Our flashlight beams showed peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, debris scattered across the floor. But something about the shadows wasn't right. They seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at them, flowing like liquid in the corners of our vision. "This is amazing," Taylor whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. She had her phone out, recording everything. "Look at all this stuff! It's like a time capsule." We moved deeper into the wing, past empty dorm rooms with their doors hanging off their hinges. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except there were places where the dust was disturbed, fresh footprints that weren't ours, and something else. Long, straight lines in the dust, as if something had been dragged. "Taylor," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "we should go back." "Just a little further," she insisted. "I want to see what's around that corner." That's when we heard it. A sound like someone humming, but distorted, as if it was coming through water. It was coming from one of the rooms ahead of us. Taylor started walking toward it before I could stop her. The room was at the end of the hall. The door was closed, unlike all the others, and there was something carved into the wood. Symbols I didn't recognize, but looking at them made my head hurt. Taylor reached for the handle. "Don't," I pleaded. But she was already turning it. The room beyond was different from the others. It was clean, for one thing. No dust, no debris. The walls were covered in more of those strange symbols, painted in something dark that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. In the center of the room was a circle drawn on the floor. And in the circle, I still have trouble describing what I saw in that circle. It was like a tear in reality, a place where the air itself had been cut open. Through the tear, I could see something. Movement. Colors that shouldn't exist. And eyes. So many eyes. Taylor stepped forward, transfixed. "Do you see it?" she whispered. "It's beautiful." That's when the humming got louder, and the thing in the circle shifted, reached out. Taylor screamed, but it wasn't a scream of fear. It was delight. She stepped into the circle before I could grab her. What happened next plays on an endless loop in my nightmares. Taylor's body began to twist, to change. Her skin rippled like water, and her face just opened up, like a flower blooming in fast motion. The thing from the tear poured into her, through her, and she was laughing the whole time, even as her voice became something else entirely. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Back through the halls, past those writhing shadows, to the elevator. I could hear something coming after me, something that moved with a wet, sliding sound. I slammed the gate shut just as Taylor, or what used to be Taylor, appeared at the end of the hall. She looked almost normal, except her movements were wrong, like a puppet being controlled by someone who'd only heard descriptions of how humans move. "Emma," she called, but her voice had harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. "Don't you want to see? Don't you want to know?" The elevator started down, and I lost sight of her. When I reached the basement, I ran straight to campus security. Told them Taylor was hurt, that we'd broken into the East Wing. They called the police, and a search was conducted, but they never found her. The official report says she probably left campus, had some kind of breakdown. They found her phone in that room, the video still recording, but the footage was corrupted. Just static and strange geometric patterns that gave people headaches if they watched too long. I tried to tell them what really happened, but of course, no one believed me. I had a breakdown of my own, spent some time in a hospital. The doctor said it was trauma, stress, guilt over losing my friend. They gave me pills that help with the nightmares most of the time. But sometimes, late at night, my phone rings. When I answer, there's just that humming sound, and a voice that's almost Taylor's, asking if I want to see, if I want to know. And sometimes, in mirrors or windows, I catch glimpses of something following me, something that moves like liquid shadow and has too many eyes. I dropped out of Cornell after that semester. Couldn't stand to be near Lancaster Hall anymore. The East Wing is still sealed, but sometimes I check the local news, looking for stories about strange happenings on campus. Last week, I found an article about 2 students who went missing after telling friends they'd found a way into the sealed wing. The police are still searching, but I know they won't find anything. just like they never found Taylor. So this is my warning. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. And if you're ever in Lancaster Hall and you hear humming coming from behind that fire door, or see shadows moving in ways they shouldn't, or feel that pressure in the air like reality is wearing thin, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because curiosity didn't just kill the cat. Sometimes it transforms it into something that was never meant to exist in our world. Something that wants to share what it found with everyone it can reach. I know, because every day I feel that thing that used to be Taylor getting closer. Every day, the humming gets a little louder, the shadows a little darker. And every day, I understand a little more of what those symbols in that room meant. Soon, I think, I'll understand completely. And when that happens, I'm not sure what I'll become. So if you're reading this, and you feel that familiar itch of curiosity about things that should stay hidden, remember Taylor. Remember what happened in the East Wing of Lancaster Hall. And remember that some questions are better left unanswered. Because the answers are still out there, moving in the shadows, wearing faces that used to belong to people, waiting for someone else who wants to know too much. And they're so very, very patient. The price of faith. I never wanted to tell this story. For years, I've kept it locked away in the darkest corners of my mind, trying to convince myself that what happened that summer in rural Arkansas wasn't real. But the nightmares won't stop, and maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it all, or at least help someone else avoid the same mistakes we made. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and in 2022, I watched my family destroy itself in the name of faith. It started with my sister Rachel. She was always the perfect one, straight A's, captain of the volleyball team, youth group leader at our church. Our parents held her up as the model of Christian virtue, especially after our older brother James left for college and stopped attending services. Looking back, maybe that pressure was what broke her. Or maybe something darker really did take hold of her that summer. I still don't know. The changes were subtle at first. Rachel started sleeping more, missing morning prayers. Mom noticed she'd stopped wearing her cross necklace, the one she'd received for her confirmation. When asked about it, Rachel just shrugged and said it felt too heavy. Then came the mood swings. My sweet, patient sister, who'd never so much as raised her voice, suddenly started lashing out at the smallest provocations. I remember the first truly frightening incident. It was during Sunday dinner, just our immediate family, plus Pastor Marcus, who'd been counseling Rachel through what Mom called her spiritual crisis. Rachel had barely touched her food, just pushing it around her plate while Pastor Marcus droned on about the importance of maintaining strong faith in these troubled times. "Rachel, honey," Mom said, reaching for her hand. "You need to eat something. You're wasting away." The fork in Rachel's hand clattered to the plate. When she looked up, her eyes were different. Darker somehow, though I still can't explain exactly how. "Maybe I'm not hungry for this garbage," she said. But her voice had a strange resonance to it, like two people speaking at once. "Maybe I'm hungry for something else." Pastor Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "Rachel, my child, are you feeling—" She cut him off with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Your child? I'm not your anything, you sanctimonious fraud. I see what you really are. I see all of you." Then she started speaking in Latin. Rachel had never studied Latin a day in her life, but the words poured out of her in a torrent, her voice growing deeper and more distorted with each phrase. Dad tried to grab her arm, but she threw him off with impossible strength, sending him stumbling into the china cabinet. That was when Pastor Marcus said the words that would change everything. "This is no crisis of faith. She's possessed." Looking back, I wish we'd taken her to a doctor, a psychiatrist, anyone who might have offered a rational explanation. But our family had always been deeply religious, and the idea of demonic possession didn't seem as far-fetched to us as it probably should have, especially after what happened next. The exorcism was scheduled for the following weekend. Pastor Marcus insisted we needed time to prepare, to purify ourselves through prayer and fasting. Rachel was kept in her room, door locked from the outside. I could hear her sometimes, having conversations with someone who wasn't there, her voice alternating between her normal tone and that deeper, otherworldly sound. One night, I crept to her door to listen. What I heard still haunts me. They think they can cast me out, the deep voice chuckled. But I'm not what they think I am. I'm older than their God, older than their faith. I am Legion, little girl, and you opened the door for me. Then Rachel's normal voice, frightened and small. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to be free. And now you are. We both are. I should have done something then. Should have called for help. Broken down the door, anything. But I was 17 and scared and still halfway convinced this was all some elaborate act of rebellion on Rachel's part. So I went back to bed and pulled the covers over my head like a child hiding from monsters. The night of the exorcism, they brought Rachel down to the basement. Mom had cleared everything out except a heavy wooden chair, which Dad and Pastor Marcus used to secure Rachel with blessed rope. The walls had been covered with crosses, and Pastor Marcus had drawn a circle of salt around the chair. Rachel, or whatever was inside her, just smiled the whole time they were tying her down. Such pretty preparations, she said in that double voice. But you forgot something important. Be silent, demon, Pastor Marcus commanded, pulling out his Bible. The power of Christ compels you. Rachel threw her head back and laughed. Oh, Marcus, if only they knew what you did to those boys in your youth group 20 years ago, would they still trust you to drive out evil? Pastor Marcus faltered for just a moment, his face going pale. That was all it took. Rachel's bonds snapped like thread, and she lunged forward with inhuman speed. Her hands found Pastor Marcus's throat, and I heard something crack before Dad and James could pull her off. Pastor Marcus wasn't dead, but his larynx was crushed. He spent 6 weeks in the hospital and never spoke above a whisper again. But that was just the beginning of our nightmare. My parents, convinced more than ever that Rachel was possessed, reached out to a network of underground exorcists, people who handled the cases the church wouldn't touch. That's how we met Father Giuseppe, an elderly Italian priest who'd been defrocked years ago for his extreme methods. Your daughter, he said after examining Rachel, has not one demon, but many. They are ancient things, older than Christianity, and they will not be easily driven out. The ritual will take days, and it will be unpleasant, but it must be done. I tried to protest. Rachel had gotten worse after the first attempted exorcism, barely eating, talking in languages none of us recognized. She needed medical help, not more religious intervention. But my parents wouldn't listen. This is a spiritual battle, Mom insisted. Modern medicine can't help with this. The next 3 days were hell. Father Giuseppe's exorcism involved techniques I'm still not sure were legal. He used blessed water that I later learned had been mixed with some kind of herb that made Rachel's skin blister. The prayers were constant, day and night, and when Rachel screamed, it didn't sound human anymore. On the second day, strange things started happening around the house. Objects would move on their own. Lights would flicker and die. The temperature in the basement would drop so low we could see our breath, then suddenly spike until we were all drenched in sweat. At one point, every cross on the walls turned upside down simultaneously. Rachel's voice became a chorus, each sentence spoken by what seemed like dozens of different entities. They knew things they couldn't possibly know. Secrets about each of us, things we'd never told anyone. They described deaths that hadn't happened yet, including Father Giuseppe's own passing, which, I later learned, happened exactly as predicted, 3 months after he left our house. But the worst part was watching my sister's body deteriorate. She had always been athletic, strong, but after days without food or real rest, tied to that chair while Father Giuseppe performed his rituals, she began to waste away. Her skin turned gray, her eyes sank into dark hollows, and still our parents wouldn't consider taking her to a hospital. The demons are weakening, Father Giuseppe assured us. One final push, and they will be cast out. That final push nearly killed her. I still remember every detail of that last night, though God knows I've tried to forget. The basement air was thick with incense, and the copper smell of blood from where the ropes had cut into Rachel's wrists. Father Giuseppe had been chanting for hours, his voice hoarse but determined. Rachel's head snapped up, and when she spoke, it was with a voice that made the walls shake. Enough of this game, the thing inside her said. You want to see what true power looks like, little priest? What happened next defied physics and reason. Rachel's body began to contort, her joints bending in impossible ways. Her skin stretched and rippled as if something was moving beneath it. When she opened her mouth, a black liquid poured out, spreading across the floor like living shadows. Father Giuseppe raised his crucifix. "By all that is holy." "Nothing is holy." The voice was deafening now, and the black liquid began to rise from the floor in tendrils. "Your faith is a candle in an infinite darkness, and we are going to show you just how easily it can be snuffed out." The shadows struck like snakes, wrapping around Father Giuseppe's throat and arms. He tried to fight, but they pulled him down, dragging him toward Rachel's chair. I heard him praying in Italian, saw him trying to make the sign of the cross, but the shadows wouldn't let go. That's when James finally did what none of us had been brave enough to do. He ran upstairs and called 911. The paramedics arrived to find Rachel in cardiac arrest. Father Giuseppe was unconscious, covered in what the medical report would later describe as burns of unknown origin. The basement. The basement looked like a torture chamber, which in retrospect, I suppose it was. Rachel spent 3 months in the hospital, first in intensive care, then in the psychiatric ward. The doctors diagnosed her with a combination of conditions: severe depression, religious psychosis, possibly schizophrenia. With proper medication and therapy, she slowly began to improve. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear her talking to herself in those strange languages. Sometimes I catch her staring at me with eyes that don't quite look like hers. And sometimes, when she thinks no one is watching, I see her smile in a way that makes me wonder if the doctors are wrong. If maybe those things in the basement are still there, hiding behind her eyes, waiting. Our family never really recovered. Mom and Dad divorced last year. Dad couldn't forgive Mom for insisting on the exorcisms for so long, and Mom couldn't forgive Dad for finally agreeing to hospitalization. James hasn't spoken to either of them since that night. He's working on a book about religious trauma and the dangers of extreme faith. As for me, I still go to church sometimes, but I sit in the back pew, as far from the altar as possible. Because now I know that faith can be dangerous. That sometimes the real demons aren't the ones we think we're fighting, but the ones we create ourselves through blind devotion and unyielding belief. Rachel lives with me now. She takes her medication, goes to therapy, holds down a job at the local library. To anyone else, she probably seems completely normal. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and find her standing in my doorway, watching me sleep. And in those moments, I can't help but wonder, did we ever really drive out what was inside her? Or did we just teach it to hide better? I keep holy water under my bed and crosses on every wall. Not because I believe they'll protect me, I'm not sure I believe in anything anymore, but because old habits die hard. And sometimes, when the night is darkest and the house is too quiet, I think I hear whispers in Latin coming from Rachel's room. But I don't get up to check anymore. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left closed. And some stories, like this one, are better left untold. But I've told it anyway. Maybe because I need someone else to know what happened. Maybe because I hope it will help someone else avoid our mistakes. Or maybe because the things that happened in our basement that summer want to be known, want to be remembered, want to spread. If you're reading this and recognize something of your own story in it, if someone you love starts changing in ways you can't explain, please get help. Real help. Medical help. Don't let faith blind you to reality like it blinded us. Because sometimes the price of faith is too high. Sometimes it costs you everything. And sometimes, what comes back isn't what was taken away. I know this because I watch my sister every day, and even though she smiles and laughs and seems like herself again, I know better. We all do. Whatever walked out of that basement wearing Rachel's face isn't really Rachel anymore. But we pretend it is, because the alternative is too horrible to contemplate, and because sometimes, late at night, when I hear those whispers from her room, I think I'm starting to understand them. Night shift. Dead bodies never stay quiet. I never thought I'd end up working in a morgue at 18. Life has a way of pushing you down unexpected paths, and mine led me to the basement of Memorial Hospital, where the fluorescent lights never quite reach the corners, and the silence weighs heavy like a wool blanket. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I need to tell someone what happened during my last night shift. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. Maybe someone will believe me. Or maybe I just need to get it out before these memories drive me completely insane. I took the job because I needed the money. Simple as that. My dad passed away last year, leaving me and my stepmom Jenny struggling to keep our heads above water. College wasn't an option anymore, not with the medical bills piling up, so I started looking for work. When I saw the posting for a night shift morgue attendant, I figured it couldn't be worse than retail. The pay was good, really good for an 18-year-old with no experience, and all I had to do was process paperwork and keep an eye on things. Things being dead bodies, of course. The first few months weren't so bad. You get used to it, believe it or not. The morgue at Memorial is modern, all stainless steel and clean lines. The wall of storage units looks like a giant filing cabinet, each drawer holding someone's loved one until final arrangements can be made. During training, my supervisor Marcus showed me how to log new arrivals, handle the paperwork, and properly store the bodies. He made it seem almost normal, just another job with procedures to follow. "The dead can't hurt you," he'd said with a kind smile. "It's the living you've got to worry about." I wish he'd been right. My shift usually started at 10 p.m. I'd take over from the evening attendant, check the logs, and settle in for a quiet night of paperwork and occasional new arrivals. We had a small office with windows looking out onto the main storage area, which helped it feel less claustrophobic. I'd bring my laptop, watch Netflix, study for my GED, anything to pass the time between tasks. The night everything changed started like any other. I arrived a few minutes early, chatted with Rita from the evening shift about her grandkids, and did my usual rounds. We had 3 new arrivals that day: an elderly man who'd passed from pneumonia, a middle-aged woman who'd had a heart attack, and a car crash victim who hadn't been fully processed yet. Rita had warned me about the crash victim. "Bad one," she'd said, shaking her head. "Young girl, probably not much older than you. Drunk driver hit her head on. They're still waiting on some paperwork before we can release her to the funeral home." I nodded, trying not to think too hard about it. You learn quickly in this job not to dwell on the stories, especially when they hit close to home. I'd lost friends to drunk drivers before. We all have. Around midnight, I was halfway through an episode of The Great British Bake Off when the power flickered. Just for a second, barely enough to notice, but in a morgue, you notice everything. I looked up from my laptop, scanning the storage area through the office windows. The backup generators would kick in if we lost power completely, but even a minor disruption could cause problems with our cooling systems. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. In this job, your mind can wander to dark places if you let it. But there she was, standing in front of storage unit 271, the drawer where we'd placed the crash victim. She was young, maybe 20, wearing what looked like a torn party dress. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. I blinked hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered, running my hands over my face. I'd been working too many doubles lately, not getting enough sleep. That had to be it. But then the temperature dropped. I don't mean it got a little chilly. The temperature plummeted so fast my breath came out in visible puffs. The fluorescent lights flickered again, longer this time, and I heard a sound that still haunts my dreams. The slow, metallic scrape of a storage drawer opening. Unit 271 was sliding open, all on its own. I should have called security. I should have run. Instead, I did what we're trained to do when something seems wrong. I went to check it out. Standing on shaky legs, I grabbed my flashlight and keycard, then stepped out of the office. The storage area felt different at night when something was wrong. The rows of steel drawers stretched out before me like a metal maze, and the usual hum of the cooling system seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. As I approached Unit 271, I noticed something else. A smell. Not the usual clinical morgue smell of disinfectant and cold metal, but something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. The drawer was open about 6 inches, just enough to see that the body bag inside was unzipped. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Who was I expecting to answer? "Security, is that you?" Silence. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone to call Marcus. No signal. Of course. The basement level of Memorial was notorious for bad reception. I'd have to use the landline back in the office. That's when I heard it. A wet, sliding sound behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. But there was nothing there, just rows and rows of storage units, their handles gleaming dully in the light. I started backing toward the office, keeping my flashlight moving. The smell was getting stronger, and the temperature kept dropping until I was shivering uncontrollably. I was almost to the office door when all the lights went out. The backup generators should have kicked in immediately. They didn't. I stood frozen in complete darkness, my flashlight beam seeming impossibly small in the vast blackness of the morgue. The sweet, rotting smell was overwhelming now, and I could hear something moving in the darkness. Something wet and heavy dragging itself across the floor. My flashlight caught movement to my left. Just a glimpse, a pale hand disappearing behind a row of storage units. Then another sound, closer this time, the squelch of wet feet on tile. I ran straight for the office, fumbling with my keycard at the door. Behind me, I could hear more storage units opening, their motors whirring in the darkness. The door beeped and clicked open, and I practically fell inside, slamming it behind me. The office phone was dead. Through the windows, I could see my flashlight beam reflecting off the storage units, creating strange shadows that seemed to move and shift. The dragging sound was getting closer. I pressed myself into the corner behind the desk, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. Then she appeared at the window. The crash victim stood there, her body twisted at impossible angles, her face pressed against the glass. Her eyes were open. God help me, her eyes were open, but they were all wrong, clouded and dark like murky water. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, and dark liquid began running down the glass. I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. I could only watch as more figures emerged from the darkness behind her. More bodies, all in various states of decay, all moving with that same terrible, broken grace. They pressed against the windows, their hands leaving streaks of black fluid on the glass. The power came back on. The sudden flood of fluorescent light made me cry out. I blinked against the brightness, and when my vision cleared, the windows were empty. No bodies, no streaks, nothing. I ran to the door and yanked it open, half expecting hands to grab me, but the storage area was completely normal. Every drawer was closed. The temperature was back to its usual cool setting. Even the smell was gone. Unit 271 was exactly as it should be, sealed tight with its paperwork properly displayed. When Marcus found me an hour later, I was still sitting in the office corner, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. He checked the security cameras, but they showed nothing, just static during the power outage. He checked Unit 271, and the crash victim was there, properly stored, the body bag sealed. I quit that morning. They tried to convince me to stay, offered me a raise, suggested I was just overtired. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was all in my head. But I know what I saw. 3 days later, I was watching the local news when a story caught my attention. The body of the crash victim had disappeared from the funeral home. The police were investigating, but there were no signs of break-in, no evidence of theft. The body had simply vanished. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to move on, tried to forget what happened that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment and the power flickers, I smell that sweet, rotting scent. Sometimes in my dreams, I hear the sound of storage drawers opening in the dark. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in a window at night, I see her standing behind me, her ruined face twisted in that silent scream, her dark eyes watching, waiting. I know she's still out there. I know they all are. And I know that Marcus was wrong. The dead can hurt you. They're just waiting for their chance. I thought that would be the end of my story, but I need to add something. Last week, I received a letter at my new address, an address I hadn't shared with anyone from Memorial. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address written on it, and underneath, 4 words that made my blood run cold. We miss you, Sarah. The address was for a cemetery on the outskirts of town. Unit 271 was a plot number. I haven't gone to check it out. I won't. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what I'd find if I did. Would there be an empty grave? Or would I find something worse, something waiting for me? I don't sleep much these days. I keep all my lights on and I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment. It probably seems paranoid, but you haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't heard what I've heard, and you haven't read the second letter that came yesterday. Coming to visit soon. The handwriting was wet and dark, and the paper smelled sweet and rotten. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I don't know where I'm going, but I know I can't stay here. If you're reading this, please, be careful at night. Pay attention to the shadows. And if you ever find yourself working in a morgue and the power goes out, don't look behind you. Whatever you do, don't look behind you. Because sometimes the dead don't stay where we put them. Sometimes they remember who was watching over them, and sometimes they want to return the favor. I have to go now. The power just flickered, and I smell something sweet.